The winter of '83 was a graveyard of broken promises. Sophia had burned her last kitchen chair for firewood. One night away from freezing to death, a heavy fist hammered her door. A giant of a mountain man stood in the blizzard. "Pack your things," he growled. "You're coming home." The Dakota Territory in January of 1883 was not a place for the weak, and Sophia Montgomery was rapidly running out of strength. The wind howling across the Black Hills didn't just blow, it screamed. A relentless, physical force that battered the thin log walls of her isolated cabin. Inside, the frost had crept across the floorboards, thick and white, inching closer to the stone hearth where the fire was nothing but a pathetic cluster of dying orange embers. Sophia sat wrapped in every quilt she owned, her trembling hands clutching a tin cup of hot water, her only meal in 2 days. The pantry was entirely bare. The last handful of flour had been turned into a hard, tasteless biscuit 3 days ago. The last piece of salted pork had been stretched over a week, boiled until there was nothing left but gristle and memory. She was 24 years old, but looking into the shard of mirror above the wash basin earlier that day, she had seen the hollowed, sunken cheeks of an old, dying woman. She was starving. By her reckoning, she had 1 night left before the cold, and the hunger stopped her heart entirely. Her husband, Thomas Montgomery, had brought her out here from Ohio with eyes full of gold fever and promises of a sprawling ranch in the valleys. But Thomas hadn't understood the brutal reality of the West. He had borrowed heavily from Josiah Caldwell, a ruthless banker in Deadwood, to finance a mining claim that yielded nothing but dust and backache. When Thomas died in November, officially of pneumonia, though Sophia always suspected the severe beating he'd taken from Caldwell's debt collectors in town had ruined his lungs, he had left her with nothing but a worthless patch of frozen dirt and a target on her back. Caldwell's men had already taken the horses, the cattle, and the good wagon. They had left her to freeze, assuming the winter would do their dirty work and clear the deed. They were right. Sophia pulled the quilts tighter, squeezing her eyes shut as a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the heavy oak door. She prayed for sleep to take her quickly. She prayed she wouldn't wake up to feel the gnawing, sharp pain in her stomach anymore. Then she heard it. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, heavy, rhythmic. Sophia froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart, sluggish and weak just moments before, began to hammer violently against her ribs. Who could possibly be out in this blizzard? It had to be Harlan Miller. Miller was Caldwell's chief enforcer, a cruel, cold-blooded man who wore a silver-studded gun belt and took pleasure in terrorizing the vulnerable. He had told her a month ago that if she didn't vacate the cabin by the new year, he'd burn it down with her inside. Thud, thud, thud. "Open the door, Sophia." The voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very logs of the cabin. It wasn't the sharp, nasal twang of Harlan Miller. Trembling, Sophia threw off the blankets, her legs weak and shaking as they hit the freezing floorboards. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth, her only weapon, and shuffled toward the door. She fumbled with the wooden latch, her numb fingers protesting, and pulled the door inward just a fraction. The wind violently ripped the door from her grasp, throwing it wide open. Snow swirled into the dark cabin, bringing a blast of air so cold it felt like knives against her skin. Filling the doorway was a mountain of a man. He was clad in a massive, thick bearskin coat, dusted heavily with snow. Ice clung to his thick, dark beard and the brim of his weathered slouch hat. Slung over his broad shoulder was a Henry repeating rifle. He looked less like a man and more like a force of Nasia, a wild creature birthed directly from the blizzard itself. Sophia stumbled backward, raising the iron poker with a pathetic, shaking grip. "Get out!" she rasped, her voice cracking. "I have nothing left. Tell Caldwell he's won." The giant didn't move to attack her. He stepped into the cabin, pulling the heavy door shut behind him, cutting off the deafening roar of the wind. In the sudden, dim quiet, he looked down at her. His eyes, visible beneath the brim of his hat, were a piercing, stormy gray. It was Roman Boone. Everyone in Deadwood knew the name, though few actually knew the man. He was a solitary trapper who lived high up on Iron Peak, a man who traded furs for powder and coffee twice a year and spoke to no one. Rumors swirled around him that he was a former Texas Ranger who had killed his corrupt captain, that he was an outlaw hiding from a federal noose, that he had lived with the Lakota for a decade. He was a ghost of the high timber. "Put the iron down, girl," Roman said, his voice surprisingly calm, though it carried the heavy weight of absolute authority. "You couldn't swing it hard enough to bruise a peach right now." "What do you want?" Sophia whispered, lowering the poker an inch. She swayed on her feet, the sudden adrenaline burning up the last of her energy reserves. Roman's eyes swept the room, taking in the empty shelves, the dead fire, and finally her gaunt, shivering frame. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he unslung a heavy canvas sack from his back and dropped it onto the floor with a thud. "Pack your things," he growled, pulling off his thick leather gloves. "You're coming home." Sophia stared at him, bewildered. "Home? My home is in Ohio." I don't know you, Mr. Boone. I'm not going anywhere with you." Roman stepped forward, moving with a terrifying, silent grace for a man of his size. He grabbed the iron poker from her hand and tossed it clattering onto the hearth. "You stay here, you're dead by sunrise. I made a promise to Thomas, and I intend to keep it." "Thomas?" Sophia gasped, her eyes widening. "Thomas didn't know you. He hated the mountains." "Thomas knew me well enough to drag me out of a collapsed ravine 2 winters ago, when my horse broke its leg and I shattered my ribs," Roman said bluntly, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "He sat with me in a snow cave for 2 days. Saved my life. A month before he died, he rode up to my claim. Told me he'd found something in his mine, something Caldwell wanted. Told me if anything happened to him, I was to come get you before Caldwell's men did." Sophia's head spun. Thomas had found something? He had never told her, and he had arranged for this wild, terrifying hermit to rescue her? The room began to tilt sideways. The edges of her vision blackened. "I can't," she mumbled, her knees buckling. Before she could hit the freezing floor, Roman caught her. His arms were like steel bands, yet surprisingly gentle, as he lifted her entirely off the ground. Through the haze of her fading consciousness, she felt the coarse, smelling warmth of the bearskin coat, the smell of pine smoke and raw leather. "Sleep, Sophia," he muttered, his chest rumbling against her ear. "I've got you." When Sophia regained consciousness, she wasn't in her cabin. She was wrapped tightly in heavy wool and trapped against a broad, solid back. The howling wind was deafening. She opened her eyes and was immediately blinded by the swirling white of the blizzard. She was on the back of a massive roan horse, tied securely at the waist to Roman Boone, who sat in the saddle in front of her. He was shielding her from the brunt of the storm, his massive frame breaking the wind as the horse plunged through snowdrifts that reached its chest. "Keep your face buried in my coat," Roman roared over the wind, feeling her stir. "Don't look up, or your lungs will freeze." Sophia obeyed, burying her face into the thick, animal-smelling fur. She was exhausted, terrified, and freezing, but beneath the terror, a strange, flickering spark of warmth began to bloom. She wasn't alone anymore. This man, a stranger bound by a debt of honor, was fighting the mountain to save her life. The journey felt like an eternity. Hours bled into one another as the horse, a beast Roman called Samson, tirelessly pushed up the steep, treacherous incline of Iron Peak. Several times, Samson stumbled, and Roman would dismount, plunging into waist-deep snow to lead the animal by the reins, physically carving a path through the drifts, while Sophia clung to the saddle. Just as Sophia felt the icy grip of sleep pulling her under again, the wind abruptly died down. They had breached the tree line, entering a dense, sheltered grove of ancient pines. Tucked against the side of a massive rock face was a sturdy log cabin. Smoke poured merrily from its stone chimney, a beacon of life in the dead world. Roman untied her, lifting her from the saddle as if she weighed no more than a child, and carried her inside. The blast of heat inside the cabin was intoxicating. It smelled of cured venison, wood smoke, and strong coffee. Roman placed her gently onto a bed piled high with thick pelt blankets. Over the next 3 days, Sophia drifted in and out of a feverish sleep. Every time she woke, Roman was there. The gruff, terrifying mountain man became a quiet, constant caregiver. He spoon-fed her rich, salty bone broth. He kept the fire roaring. He applied foul-smelling, warm poultices to her frostbitten toes. As her strength slowly returned, so did her awareness of the intense, unspoken tension filling the small cabin. Roman rarely spoke unless necessary. He spent his days repairing traps, cleaning his firearms, or standing by the window, his stormy eyes scanning the white expanse of the mountain below. He was a deeply handsome man under the dirt and beard, with sharp, aristocratic features that didn't match his rough clothes. On the fourth evening, Sophia sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, watching him oil the action of a Winchester rifle. "You said Thomas found something," Sophia said, her voice finally steady. "What was it?" Roman paused, the oiled rag freezing in his hand. He looked up at her, the firelight dancing in his gray eyes. "He found a vein, Sophia. Not gold. Silver. The richest vein anyone's ever seen in these parts. Right beneath that worthless patch of dirt, Caldwell sold him. But Thomas was smart. He didn't register the amended claim in town. He mapped it, hid the map, and then Caldwell caught wind of the rumors." Sophia's breath hitched. "So Thomas didn't die of a fever?" "No," Roman said softly, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "Harlan Miller beat him to death, trying to find out where the map was. Thomas never broke. But Caldwell knows you have it. Or he thinks you do. That's why he's been trying to starve you out. He wanted you desperate enough to trade whatever Thomas left behind for a scrap of food." Tears pricked Sophia's eyes, grief and rage warring in her chest. "I don't have a map. I don't know anything about a silver vein." "I know," Roman said, setting the rifle aside. He stood up and walked over to a heavy iron lockbox sitting on a high shelf. He brought it down, produced a brass key from his neck, and opened it. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment and handed it to her. "Because Thomas gave it to me." Sophia stared at the intricate drawings, recognizing her husband's neat handwriting. "Why?" "Because he knew Caldwell would kill you for it. He figured if I had it, I could sell it to a rival mining syndicate in Denver, set up a trust in your name, and you could go back to Ohio, a rich woman." Roman looked away, staring into the fire. "He trusted me to keep you alive until the spring thaw." Sophia looked at the map, then up at the giant of a man who had pulled her from the jaws of death. "And what about you, Roman? What do you get out of this?" He finally looked back at her, a profound, heavy sorrow in his gaze. "I pay off a debt, and maybe I buy back a fraction of my soul." Before Sophia could ask what he meant, a sound shattered the quiet intimacy of the cabin. Outside, Roman's 3 hunting hounds erupted into a chorus of vicious, frantic barking. It wasn't the sound they made when a wolf or a bear was near. It was the specific, aggressive pitch reserved for men. Roman's demeanor instantly changed. The quiet caregiver vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened killer. He grabbed the Winchester from the table, levering a round into the chamber with a sharp, metallic clack. He moved to the window, peering through a small crack in the heavy wooden shutters. "What is it?" Sophia whispered, terror icing her veins. "Looks like Caldwell got tired of waiting for you to freeze," Roman said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Sophia crept to the window beside him. Down below, struggling up the narrow mountain path through the snow, were 6 men on horseback. Even in the fading light, Sophia recognized the man leading the pack. It was Harlan Miller, wearing his silver-studded gun belt over a heavy winter duster. They had followed Sampson's deep tracks up the mountain. "They brought dynamite," Roman noted grimly, spotting the wooden crates strapped to a pack mule. "They aren't here to negotiate. They're here to blow this cabin off the face of Iron Peak, take the map from my corpse, and bury you in the rubble." Roman turned to Sophia. The vulnerability she had seen in him moments before was locked away behind a wall of pure ice. He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy Colt revolver, pressing it into her hands. "Get in the root cellar under the floorboards," he ordered, his eyes burning into hers. "Do not come out, no matter what you hear. If the door opens and it isn't me, you empty this gun into whoever is standing there. Do you understand me, Sophia?" "Roman, there are 6 of them!" Sophia cried, gripping his arm. "They'll kill you!" A dark, dangerous smirk pulled at the corner of the mountain man's mouth. "They're welcome to try, but they're a long way from town, Sophia. Up here, this is my mountain, and I do not take kindly to trespassers." The root cellar smelled of damp earth, old potatoes, and suffocating terror. Sophia sat huddled on a wooden crate in pitch blackness, the heavy Colt revolver gripped so tightly in both hands that her knuckles ached. Above her, the thick floorboards muffled the sounds of the brewing storm, but they did nothing to block the noise of the approaching violence. She heard the heavy wooden shutters slam shut and the iron bar slide into place. Then, silence. A terrible, agonizing silence that stretched for minutes. broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. Where was Roman? Then came the voice, distorted by the wind, but undeniably belonging to Harlan Miller. Boone! We know she's in there. Caldwell don't want no trouble with you, mountain man. Send the girl out with the paper and we ride away. You got my word. A solitary gunshot rang out a sharp, deafening crack from Roman's Winchester. It wasn't fired from inside the cabin. It came from outside, somewhere in the tree line behind the structure. A man screamed, a wet, gurgling sound that was quickly swallowed by the wind. He's outside, Harlan roared. Burn it! Throw the powder! Sophia squeezed her eyes shut. Boom! The explosion was catastrophic. The entire cabin violently